Hello everyone. So I know some of you are still struggling with the getting out of the ruts assignment from last week. I know most of you have turned in the assignment. I'm just going to go over it to those of you, go over the assignment for those of you that are still struggling with it, and maybe clear up some of the things that you're struggling with to help you get started so you can move along on that assignment. I know I get a lot of people wanting videos and stuff on how to do the assignment. Part of what we're trying to teach in this class is help you to learn how to read documentation. I mean, if there's one thing I could get you to understand that you could come out of this class doing is learning how to read the documentation, because that will get you farther in programming than anything else. A lot of times, most libraries and frameworks, they don't have any videos or anything you can watch. There's no samples. You have to learn. It's a skill you have to learn in this field. You have to learn to read the documentation. And I know you all can do it. It's not that hard. It just takes some practice. And so, that's why there's some weeks I don't post a video on how to do things, because I'm trying to challenge you. I'm trying to get you to think critically and just not wanting to immediately get help. But I mean, I don't ever want you feeling lost. I don't ever want you feeling stuck. So just beware of that. So some weeks, that's why some weeks I post a video. I've kind of been posting a little bit less every week. I don't know if you've noticed. I post a lot of videos at the beginning, but I'm trying to get you to transition into, all right, I got to read. What do I have to do? Read the instructions, digest what I have to do, make a plan, and move forward. And a lot of times you might have to read the documentation. Sometimes if you read the documentation, it would saves time in the long run than just trying to plug and play. Sometimes if you just step back, read how things work, maybe do a simple example first before you try and do the assignment. Sometimes I think some of you might get a little bit farther and things will make a lot more sense to you. Because a lot of times, if I'm doing it, you understand how I do things, but you need to understand how you need to do things. And, different circumstances require you to write code differently. And so I need you to learn these skills to think critically. So to get started, I know a lot of you are stuck, and I do apologize. I know this week was a really bad week for me to be out. There's a lot of new stuff. We tried. That's why I tried to tell you. Understand CSS Grid in week 5, because it's going to be coming back in week 8, or maybe it was week 6. I don't know. Whatever we did that card assignment, I was wanting you really to try and get an understanding of it. So this week would be a little bit easier. But I'll go over some things now. Hopefully to help you move forward on this assignment, and so you can feel comfortable using CSS Grid to move forward. So first off, this assignment kind of has twofold purposes. So first, actually, there's kind of three. So first, they're going to be reviewing stuff from CIT 230. I think 230, whatever the class is before this. Things like the picture element, that should all be reviewed. I know some of you have taken the class in the past before a lot of these things have been introduced, and that might have confused you a little bit. So as you go to the documentation, or go to examples. There's a lot of examples. That's the great thing about the web. There's usually, if you read the documentation or examples, there's usually people who are willing to help you understand how things work. So, all right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're wanting you to try and on atomic design. We're trying to get you to think about better ways to writing code and more efficient ways to writing code. We see a lot of students, and this is completely fine, because you're all still learning, you're all still trying to get to understand how to write code. But a lot of students write code very inefficiently, and they ended up repeating themselves and doing, they end up writing all this code for two different things that are pretty similar. So to give an example, so in this example, we're talking about like component-based design. So as you can see here, we have all these little boxes all look the same. There's an image with some text, like a title text and some subtitle text. And do you see how there's always an image and a title text and subtitle text? So this we'd call like a component. So we like to break things down on the web and CSS into components, on things that are reusable pieces of code. And so you see the only thing that's different here is the positioning of this text. Some have it positioned on the bottom to the right, some on the bottom to the left, on the top to the left, on the bottom to the left. And so we want you to think of how do you write this code in a way that is reusable, so you don't have to write a lot of different CSS and have to write different CSS rules for every one of these boxes when they're all pretty similar. And so that's where kind of component-based design comes in. And so we used to actually make the students do this and write this themselves. The students were telling us that we were giving them too much. So we kind of cut this out and we gave you an example. And we kind of cut the assignment down to pretty minimal on what you have to do. We're trying to figure out how to work more ways to have you actually write more HTML in this class and think things through critically that way. And so this assignment was meant to do that, but as we got feedback from students, we've adjusted. So, so right here we talk about the component-based design, and he has some rules on the things that you need to do to make the components. Brother Thompson's actually written all of this for you now because we used to make students do it, but now we just give you an example. So if you go through and you can see here's all the different components, and you can see how the picture element renders a landscape picture or a portrait picture depending on what we have. And so going through, and he gives you an example. So here's his example of the components. So he has a div and he calls it media box. And so he's going to style everything that's similar with this component is called the media box. So the media box includes a picture, includes a title and a subtitle. And so you can kind of see here's the picture element, so we can do the different source sets, so we can do the different images based on the screen size. We wrap in a link, here's the title and here's the subtitle right here. And so all these components are just going to be reused over and over and over again. So if we actually look at the HTML, you can see all these components look exactly the same. They just have different images that they're using and different titles and subtitles, but the layout of these components are all the same. And so going on, and so then right here he's telling you to use these classes to control the layout on where that text goes, because we can see how the text changes positions. So we're going to use these classes right here. We're just going to append classes onto it to change that layout. And so if we look at the media component code, you can see he's using Flexbox to do this. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, CSS Grid is great for large picture layout, where Flexbox is good for small picture layout. So Flexbox strength really comes into this component-based design. So this component laying out in Flexbox is really powerful, whereas laying out the whole page is what the second part of this assignment, where you're actually going to begin, is its strength really is. Not to say you couldn't do this in CSS Grid, you totally can. But as you can see, so we're going to do flex, and he's going to do the flex flows column. So instead of things flexing from left to right, he's going to have the columns go from top to down. So this changes our orientation from horizontal to vertical. And so he's going to align the items flex start. So instead of doing things this way, it's going to align things this way. See, and he's using these right and the center classes to change how we're aligning those items in the container, in the media box container. And that's what makes it so this is really reusable. And you can see this component, and if we go back here, we can see this component. All we have to do is add one class, and all the styling's there, and everything else is the same, and it does all this layout for us. So I hope that kind of makes sense. And as we move down, this is really where the assignment starts, where we kind of leave it up to you to do. And so first what we want you to do, and so we want to use the CSS grid to, as we understand how the different components were built right here, we want to use CSS grid to place those components on the web page. So the first thing you should try and figure out is what your grid is going to be. So you're going to use that grid to lay out the different components or different elements onto that grid. And so I posted an example up here in the past, and I love all this conversation going on. This is what we're wanting in the class. A lot of people giving input, telling you how you figured things out. It really helps the semester to move forward. So as I scroll up, let me see if I can. I'll give you an example. So this is how I like to look at the grid. Not to say this is not the only way you could do this assignment. You could set up your grid completely different. But this is how I did it. So I like to look and see 5 columns. And then I like to give each of these components right here its own column. You can see that, and if we go here, you can see there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. The text I'm going to overlay on 2 rows. Not 4 columns. See, there's 5 columns, 4 rows. So you see that? And these, the text we're going to overlay are multiple columns and multiple rows. So we'll go over that a little bit later. So as we look right here, first thing I need to do is set up our grid. So what I like to do is I like to work and do everything in partials and just import the partials in the main file. So I created a layout partial, and you can see right here, a partial always begins with an underscore, and then it has the name. This tells the compiler not to create a new CSS file, but that you are going to, it's just a partial file. So that's important to do that. And then, and all we need is the name, and then we can just import it. So import the layout. And so this is going to take all our layout code and paste it right here where we import the partial. And so when we compile the CSS, you can see this is the media box code, that the partial that's being imported right here. And then our layout one's going to be imported right below when we compile it, but it has nothing in it. Well, it does, but it has comments, and so these comments don't get compiled into the CSS, the // only comments with the star, the multi-block comments get compiled in CSS. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create our grid. And so remember, we use our display grid property, and that will create a grid on the web page. So here's my example. So right here we have a grid, and I would get used to using the Chrome developer tools, or Firefox I think has some pretty decent ones as well. But I like to use Chrome. I thought they used to be a lot better than Firefox, so got used to Chrome and I've kind of stuck with Chrome. But I mean, I think Firefox is catching up a little bit on their developer tools. I know some of you like Firefox. But as you can see right here, and I think it does in Firefox too, but if we overlay where we see we have our grid right here, if we overlay, it'll actually just show what our grid looks like. And so we can visualize what's going on in all this code. So you can see right here, there's only one column, and then each element right here below is taking up its own row. So there's one column and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. Now if I take off that grid, you can see the grid disappears. We don't see it anymore on the page. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually define what our grid's going to be. And so remember, there's different ways to do this, but probably the simplest is to do a grid template column. I mean, there's grid areas you can use. You can use the shorthand grid template, but I'll just do this just so you can see. And so we just define our grid. So if we did like 30 pixels, you can see we have one column that's 30 pixels wide. And then if we did like 500 pixels, you can see how we can see our grid right here. 30 pixels and then 500 pixels right next to it. The grid also has like a repeat element, so we can actually just do, let's say we want 4 columns. Sorry about that. 4 columns that are 70 pixels. I'm just making up numbers right now. You can see how it repeats those 4 columns that are 70 pixels. And then it's just trying to figure out how many grid spaces we need to how many rows we need, because we haven't defined it. So as we looked right here, we can see I want 5 columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat 5 columns. I want 5 equal columns, and I'm just going to do 20% because 100 divided by 5 is 20. And so, you know, we can do it different, but you know, this is pretty easy to get going. So we can see how it's taken up the full page, and there's 5 equal columns that we're using. Oh, and another thing, some of you were having trouble scrolling Chrome down far enough to actually see the mobile changes. What I like to do is do the web inspector and pin it to the side, and then you can actually scroll all the way down to 150 pixels. Firefox does scroll better than Chrome. Chrome used to, and I don't know why they removed it, but I mean, if you look right here, if we just kind of try and scroll, you can see it doesn't get that small. Another thing you can actually do, is you can actually use this right here. There's this little icon right here, and you can click it. You can actually see what it looks like on different devices. So it's like, this is what it looks on an iPhone 5 or an iPhone SE. You know, this is what it looks like on an iPhone 10 or an iPhone 6 or 7. You can see how it's actually going to look. So this is really handy to use as well, the devices. And you can actually do your own custom sizes. I mean, if you go here and edit, you can actually see there's tons of devices you can add and see. Get familiar with your dev tools. I mean, you know, there's this animation one that will be useful this week. And I think I might have a video and explain a little bit of that. So I'm going to just turn it off, and I'm just going to use the normal for right now. But as you can see, we have five grid columns, and then we're just having 2 rows because all these elements are just stacking next to each other. So first, remember, and then as we went through, remember we decided there was going to be 4 rows, 1 row for each component on mobile. It could be different. We could lay our grid different on desktop. It might be wise to do that. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to just repeat 4 rows. Okay, I'm going to set my rows, and I'm going to use this fraction element, and this just creates four equal elements, row elements. Okay, it's just going to take that space and divide it equally 4 ways. Read up on this. It's a new unit, measurement unit that they added with CS Grid. But now, as you can see, I have 4 rows with 5 columns each in the grid. Okay, and so the next thing we want to do is actually start placing the items in the grid. So I'm going to actually uncomment these out right here, this code. And so I don't have to, because if I refresh the inspector, I'll lose it. And so I'm going to have this code right here, and I'm going to uncomment it out, okay? And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just set up my text. I'm going to get it oriented vertically. I'm going to change the size to what I want, set it to uppercase, the font weight. And as we refresh the page, you can see that kind of looks more like what the picture was looking like. And you can kind of see how in the first column it's taken up. But if things are too big, they will overflow in the column. But you see how they generally try and stick into the columns that they are given. The text is a little big, so it's overflowing. I mean, if we make it smaller, it will constrain too. And actually, maybe if we even do a block element, it might even constrain too. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, it doesn't look like it. So now we have our text laid out right, and we have our things. So what we need to do is start placing items in the grid. So if we look at our HTML, we see we have our titles, and then we have these media boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this first title. So right here in SAS, if we use this ampersand symbol, it compiles the CSS code like this. So it'll compile it like with a title class and then .part1. And remember, there was a quiz question that talked about what's the difference between this and this. This is the same element we're targeting. It's just we're targeting an element with 2 classes, whereas this is we're targeting an element inside of the title class, the part1 class inside of the title1 class. I know some of you are still confused, but that's what the ampersand does. And always check your CSS, see how it's compiling. So if we look right here, you can actually see, I do kind of hate how SAS compiles the CSS, but I mean, we don't really care because we're going to be using the SAS, but you can kind of see how that compiled it. If I take away that ampersand, you can, whoops, let me see right here. Did it compile? Oh, looks like it's taken a while to recompile. Sometimes I just restart the SAS compiler. Let me see here. Oh yeah, see, it's just taking a minute. But you see how I added the space right there? So always check the CSS. SAS is just uncompiled CSS. It gives us these tools that we can use, and we can compile the CSS to what we want. And so we're going to use the ampersand right here. And so if we look right here, we have the title, and we have it titled, and we have a part 1, and then we have the title, so these are the shared elements, and then a part 2. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to decide what row we're going to be in. So first thing, sorry about the hello, I had to pause it, my computer was dying. So first thing we want to do is decide what column and row we want to place this element. And so we use these grid child properties. So let me move this down here. CSS grid. CSS Tricks has a good guide on grid. I mean, I would read it. Go through and read and understand what each property does. So there's parent container, there's grid, the parent properties, and there's children properties. So these are the parent properties, and you can see we use the grid template columns and the grid template rows to create our columns. I mean, you can actually even create gaps in your grid with it. I mean, there's tons of different properties. They've made it really slick and easy to use, but the basic, you can actually create an area with names and lay it out with names. I mean, really, it's really powerful. And the short end, this is the gaps. You can actually create gaps between the columns and the rows if you want. So really powerful. And then you can align the items like Flexbox with justify items and the align items. Just go through it and just really understand it. Place items. Some of these things might be place items and justify content and stuff might be handy on the desktop grid. So keep that in mind. So really get to understand that. So you can see our container class, our main container, this is our grid. So this is the parent properties. This is where we put the parent properties. All these elements inside would be children properties, just the immediate children inside. And so if we look right here, we can see the properties for the children. And if we look, none of these properties have no effect when we use grid. We can't use inline block, we can't use table cells, we can't use floats, vertical line, column dash star, none of them have any effect because it's a grid and we can only use the grid properties. So none of those properties listed will work. And so there's different ways you can do this. You can specify a grid, how many columns you want it to span. There's names, auto, line. I'm just going to give you an simple example. So this is just kind of an or right here. So this is what you can do. It's going to be a number or a name. If you use grid template areas, you can actually specify name. You can specify how many columns you want to span, or span names, auto. So I'm just going to use a number because that's easiest to understand. So first we want to do, so if we look back at our image up here, you can kind of see this text is kind of taking over two columns right here. So we're going to place that item in those two columns. So we're going to use grid column start. So we want it to start in the first column. Okay, so if we refresh the page and we look right here, you can see it's starting in the first column. If we change this to third, you can see how it starts in the third column or the fifth. If we do 6, it's actually hiding because it actually creates a new column for us in the grid. So I mean, that's not what we want, because we want it's flexible that way, but we just want to stick with what we've laid out in our grid. So if we do a grid column start, we tell which column we want to start on, and then we can tell which column we want it to end on. Grid column end. So if we want it to end on the third column, we do number 4, because if we look right here, we have 1, 2, 3 columns, and we're ending on the 4th one. So we're not going to have it on this column. So that's why we use 4. Whatever column we're going to end on it. So it doesn't include that column. It ends right before that column. Okay. So remember, we wanted to take 2 columns. So we're going to do a grid column in 3, So it's taking up those 2 columns right there. And so another way you could actually write this is you can actually use shorthand, and you can write it with this slash. So this first number will be the grid column start number, and this is the grid column end number. So that's what that slash does. We're not dividing right here. So the next thing we want to do is figure out how many rows, and you can kind of see how it overlaps onto 2 rows right here. I mean, the title text is a little bit different, so we're going to use the grid row, and it's the same way, grid row start and grid row end. We want it to start on the first row, and we're going to overlap onto the second row, and on the third one we're going to end. So I'm going to save this, and as we refresh the page, I mean, you're not going to see it overlap on the next row because we have other content there still that's kind of pushing it too big. So let me comment this out so you can kind of see how things are working better. Do you see how that title was pushing it down? It was right next to there, and it made it so this first grid row was big enough to fit the win right there. And so you can see now we're taking up 2 rows, and we're allowing it to take up to 2 columns. So then the next thing we want to do, so I'm going to just keep this title element commented out for a minute, just because we're going to place it down here. So the next one we want to do is we want to grab this first media box and place it. And so, we have this first media box, and we're going to look, and it looks like it takes up 3 columns, and we're taking up 1 row. So I have the code right here, and I'm just going to use the nth child selector, just so I'm not having to write additional CSS classes and markup. So we're starting on the first row, and we're ending when it hits the second row end. So this is only going to take up 1 row, and we're going to start on the third column and take up the next 3 columns, because we're going to end on the 6. So if I save that, you can kind of see how that's coming together. You can see how that's this first media box. Sorry, I'm actually selecting the wrong one. Let me see. Okay, yeah, do you see how we're taking this first? Oh, so I threw it off because I actually commented out that title. So it is the third one, but now it's the second child because this is commented out. But do you see how it's taking up that third? See, we actually replaced this image up here. Sorry about that. But you see how how we place this image above this one in the grid. I mean, you can move things around however you want in the grid. It's that powerful. Whereas floats, it's kind of depending upon how we lay things out in our HTML. So you can see that right there. So it's taking up 1 row and 3 columns. If we change this and we change it to take up 2 rows, do you see how it takes up 2 rows? It fills that space and it pushes everything down. So I'm going to switch this back because this won't work. So we're going to take up that. This next one, we want it to take up the second row right here, and we're going to take up all 6 columns, and you can see that right here. So 1 row and all 5, not 6 columns, sorry, 5 columns, because we end on 6. So there's like an imaginary column right here. So we're going to take up all that. And as we go down, you can look at the images. You can see how these are all going to take place. And so I'm going to uncomment this out right now. And you can see how things are just starting to get pushed down, and this title's getting pushed down. And we're just taking up. See, this one's taking up one row. We hover over it. We can see it's taking up one row and all 5 columns. Next one's taking up one row. We're taking up the 3rd row. So that's what I mean by one row. We're starting on the 3rd row, and we're going to take up the first 3 columns in that row. In the last one, we're going to take up the last row, and we're going to take up all 5 columns again. So this is almost done, but we have to place this titles just trying to fit wherever it can in the grid. And so if we actually go back to our layout and we uncomment this out, we want it to start on the 3rd row, and it's going to take up 2 rows. So it's going to take up the 3rd and the 4th row and end on the 5th. And we're going to have it take the last 2 columns, the 4th and 5th column, in that grid. As you can see right there, see how it overlays right there? This one's taking up 2 columns and 2 rows in the grid. And you can see how our media boxes are only taking up 1 row each. And you see how that's working? So this is the mobile layout right here. I'm going to leave the desktop layout up to you because I don't want to give you everything. I want to challenge you. You learn the most by challenging yourself. So there's a couple different things you can do. So we actually have Brother Thompson has this mixin included. And all this mixin does is it makes a media query for you. So we can go back to our layout right here. And if let me split this right here. We can actually just use this mixin. So we can, remember, we use it at include, okay, and we call the mixin name breakpoint, and then it has a variable that we need to pass in, a parameter. So you could do a large, medium, or small. He has these if statements, and it actually compiles different media queries. So we can actually do, let's just do medium. I know some of you did large. Okay, and if we actually just do a title right here, and then this at content it'll take everything that's inside of these brackets and place it right here in these at content. And this is our media query, and here's our sizes. So if we actually did this and did font size 400 pixels, if we look at the compile CSS, you can see our media queries being made right there for us. That's all this mixin does. I mean, you could write it out like this at media screen and min width, and I think it's 4.6 AEMs right there. You see that right there. This, and then we did this right here. Font size 400 pixels. This is, in sense, we're writing the exact same thing. If we look at our CSS, sorry, let me see if it saves. It may optimize it too because we're repeating ourselves. So, but this, in sense, is this exact same way to write. I mean, I think he just writes the media query like that. But I mean, we're writing the same media query. We can even write a media query just on elements. We can actually just do at media screen and min width right here. 600 pixels, and you can actually just write it, and this would only affect the title with a class part 1 right here. So that's why you probably saw me use that. I used the breakpoint, included the breakpoint up here. I'm just writing a media query on that. You can if you're more comfortable. There's advantages and both advantages. Just writing another media query and putting all your code in that media query, just like this. So that's all that breakpoint does for you. I know some of you were getting confused, and I told you just write a media query because that's all it's really doing. All right, and so I think that will get you going right here. You know, we can kind of see our grid right here kind of breaks on desktop. I want you to spend time figuring that out, and I hope this helped you. Have a good day. Thanks. Bye.